There we go.
All right. So I made a version of the collector that I was sort of like, I want to strip it down to its most bare bones thing. And really the thing that I wanted to do with this is I wanted to write it in a way that if I taught someone PHP for an hour, that they could sort of hopefully muddle through every line in it. So like I avoided as much as possible, things like passing by reference or just things that take an extra step to explain. I kind of want to just teach people arrays and then have them go through the experiment and a couple of functions. Um, so then, here's my code folder, and then these are like the 5 pages you go to. You start on welcome, and then you go to login, and then create experiment, experiment, and done. So really bare bones thing. And then if we look at it, so like here's my welcome page. Starts with like, read some settings. If we're showing conditions, do that. And then here's the welcome HTML, which is, kind of short, not bad. And then, so that'll submit to login, which, oh wait, that's the experiment class. So then here's login, and then this is like, okay, make sure that their username. I actually added some extra features just because I was wondering if that's possible, but like, you can specify that you want an email address, and it'll check that it's an email address. Or you can specify you want an mturk ID, or you can just say it needs to be 3 characters long. But the point is, we get to this point where it just says, okay, this username is fine. Like, see if you can load any old data, like previous sessions. If so, start doing that, whether it's experiment or done. Otherwise, go to create experiment. Um, and then create experiment. This is create experiment. This is like what our login is. So I split those up into 2 parts. Um, and then it's basically, find the condition, which is either, if they ask for one specifically, do that one. Otherwise, just the same version of our get random assignment where we kind of block shuffle them. And then I load in the procedure and stimuli, and I sort of do some error checking to make sure that they specified files that actually exist and so on. And then I create an experiment variable, which then I just write into sort of like a JSON file. And then I go to experiment. But the point is that this is a pretty simple file, right? Like if you had to look through this file, it's not all that intimidating.
Mm.
And so I guess the thing that I did to help with that is that I have this function here, is to get methods file. So this either loads your procedures or your stimuli. So then I have another file for create experiment that's just called create experiment functions. Like here's the get random assignment function that I think it's kind of similar to what you wrote, Mikey, for the collector.
Mm.
And then this one, it just says, like this is the way that I was loading either the stimuli or the procedure. And it's looking for like a comma separated list again, and then I just explode it and I start reading all those files. I shuffle them, and since this isn't a real collector, the shuffle function just returns true, doesn't do anything. But you can see where the shuffle function would go. So,
Yeah.
you know, I load up all the files, and then I just run the merge function, and then I shuffle it. And then this verify thing is just full of like, oh, if they have a trial type that doesn't exist, give them error. So like all the rest of this file is just error message checking, which it's really annoying when you mix error messages with logic. Like a lot of my old code where I tried to do a lot of error messages, I hate reading it because it's like a code of logic and then a line of logic and then 3 lines of error messages and then another line of logic, and it's just so hard to read. So I just sort of split all the error messages into separate functions, and so I can just do something. Okay, at this point, verify that, and then at the end of all that, I verify experiment, and that helps a lot. So part of I think the problem with our login is that we kind of bounce back and forth between actually doing stuff and then error checking, and it might be nicer if we sort of split it into like all the error checking is like a separate file entirely. You don't even have to look at it when you're trying to understand the logic, because basically if it doesn't find any errors, then nothing happens. Like it just nothing happens. But if it does find an error, it's going to exit out. So it's kind of a nice way of looking at it. Um, and then looking at the actual experiment.php. So I load the current experiment data that I wrote into the JSON before. I make sure that you haven't finished the experiment, and then I get the current trial, which if it's set to null, then or skip or something. Like null means skip. Like if you're post trial, your trial type, you put null, then it just means don't do this trial type, and then it just says go to next. But then that's it. Like that's the entire thing. And this get trial data just populates, $_current, and then for all the trial types, that's just what they would have been using. So if I look at copy word pair, for example, it just says, okay, Q is current stimuli, Q0 answers. So, kind of a complicated array. But the thing is, since this current thing is an array, I thought it would kind of encourage people just, okay, like, what is this current thing? And then you var dump it, and it's like, oh, it's got all the procedure columns, and it's got all the current responses saved, which is normally blank at this point, and it's got the fact that I'm on trial 13, post trial 2, and stuff like that. So basically, the goal was just write the collector, the main parts of it, in as few lines with the simplest of lines possible.
But we do lose features here, right? Like, so we don't have multiple experiment branches. We don't have a path.
Yeah. So this is like master. So this is like rewriting master.
Yeah.
So, but still, I think the way that we could simplify login, wrapping things into functions or a class, which I guess is what we did. But I mean, I didn't use classes just because I don't really know how to use them yet. But it seemed like they achieved the same goal. But I think it'd be pretty easy to read this for a new person who doesn't know a lot of PHP. I mean, just there's, I think, about 1,200 lines of code in the entire rewrite, and it doesn't have all the features. Like I don't have any shuffles, for example.
So a few lines.
But it runs and records data, and it has custom scoring, and I mean, it doesn't have styling. I didn't bother making a CSS sheet for it. But if we, let's see, where's simple collector? Here. Oh, right, I was breaking some of my stuff. Let's see. If I go to...
So I'm trying to look through our classes right now to see what it is we're doing, especially at login. So we're doing stuff like, okay, so making the directory for the counter. What's it between set selected and assign condition? Oh, we just save their selection versus giving them a condition.
Oh, whoops. I deleted too much. Yeah, so I think looking through what we're doing at every step and then making sure that we're doing that in sort of like a really straightforward and simple way would probably be good for the program. Because I think that what we're doing, we're doing some things that are complicated, but when we're doing that, it's possible to sort of push it into its own area. Like, for example, the shuffle functions, the way that I have it so that you can target specific columns and you can have, like our shuffles can be nested. Like that can get a little bit complicated, but then I've just been working on stripping out the functions that are necessary to work with CSVs. And it's kind of a long file, but then you just have like one file full of CSV shuffle functions, and then the rest of the logic is easy to follow. Like you can still look at the rest of the function files without getting interrupted by the big complicated ones.
I mean, part of me feels like we could get a lot of simplification, not even simplification, but just clarity on what it is we have if we had documentation on like the structure of these objects. Like, hey, this is where it starts and it feeds into here, and that changed to this method. And then we can start seeing, okay, like these are the methods we actually need to think about, because all these classes have like semantic high-level methods of like do this thing, and then they might be calling smaller things that you don't necessarily need to know how they work. You just need to know when I call this is the type of output I get. So I think
Hmm.
part of it would just be that we haven't explained most of these methods. Like even looking through things that I remember writing, I'm looking at stuff and I'm like, where the hell am I using this, or why does this need to be here? And
Yeah.
having something like a flowchart or sort of a flow of each class could really help us get a lot of understanding on what it is we're doing and what can be simplified.
Hmm.
Because part of this is like looking at what you're doing, I'm trying to even remember what features we're not getting. Because some of it is just like this seems so much of what we're doing that it's not clear what's lost or why we wrote so much more.
Yeah.
But then a lot of the stuff we wrote is very like edge case handling, like oh if you have a weird, you're trying to merge two arrays and their columns don't line up, so we need to somehow deal with that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, certainly. I'm not saying that we should get rid of features because I was
Yeah.
able to put a lot of features in here that are complicated, but don't really complicate the files that you'd be reading if you were looking at the logic. Like, for example, I set up my initiate collector is really short, but it does something kind of interesting. Oh, wait, keep clicking on Adam. I was looking at experiment class. And as a side note, the more I read that class, the more that I think I should have made one for my simplification. But anyways, so for my version of initiate, it's super short. But one thing that it's doing is I'm using this function session save path, which lets you decide where your session variables are saved. And I think that might be important for us because you know how, let me just, if we find a version of the collector that we've got, and I know that I myself have like overcomplicated this logic, but so we do this thing near the top that we sort of examine like what folder are we on the server so that we can make sure that you don't go from like Mikey experiment 1 to TK experiment 1 and then all of the procedure data and the session data from that experiment interferes with mine and it like spits you right to done when you shouldn't be at done and so on. Or you can log in as an admin to someone else's branch because you get that admin check. Or so the point is, our sessions shouldn't be shared across different collector branches that way, and we have to do all these weird checks to make sure that doesn't happen. But I load the session from a file that's internal to this collector branch. So like here are the session files for working in here. And actually these files are really tiny. Like all I have is saying is like the name, the login ID, and the session ID, and then I actually have a different serialize for all of the like experiment data, which is a little bit more complicated, but not too bad. So I think that'd be a cool idea, just to save session into a local branch of the collector. It simplifies a lot of the checking that we're doing that's unnecessary, and we don't have to worry so much about like garbage collection deleting our session without us being able to control it, because ordinarily it's fine if people get logged out after 20 minutes and then they can just log back in and not a problem. But for us, that means like an experiment gets ruined. So we'd have better control over it with that. And then the other thing that I did that was kind of fun is, so I set up like procedure 1 and procedure 2, and same thing with stimuli, in a slightly different way. But basically, you can have 2 stimuli columns, and then you can have multiple sort of item columns in the procedure files. So I thought that was fun. Let's see, what would have an example of that? Maybe so let's see, if I look at, so I have a couple procedures here. I have a study procedure and then a final questions procedure. So if I look at my study procedure, it just says, stimuli study pairs, and then I'm using items 2 to 5 and then 2 to 5 again. And then if I look at my final questions procedure, it's again using stimuli 2 and 3, but it's doing it from a different file. It's doing it from the final question stimuli. And the way that it's doing that, so we've got, this column, stimuli final questions, doesn't pull from the same stim file. It pulls from whatever is loaded under this entry. So it would pull from the FQ stim file. So that's just sort of an interesting trick. that you can do. Because then, I mean, the reason that I wanted to make that is because we have these procedures that it's really easy to tie in an extra procedure, right? Like we can do this FQ procedure even in the collector, right? But if you are referencing stimuli, then you have to worry about, well, will the items from this procedure have a conflict with the items of this procedure, right? Like if I made some complicated, OSPAN task that needed 20 stimuli to work, I couldn't just always expect them to be in positions 2 through 20, right? Because they might be using those rows for something else.
Yeah.
So if we just something like with this model of stimuli, I could just have a stimuli column that's called, Tyson's extra task stimuli and procedure extra task, and then this file would only be using that stimuli file, and there'd be no interaction with the rest of your experiment using a different procedure and stimuli file, even though it's stitched together to look seamless to the participant.
Hmm.
So that was kind of fun to make.
I mean, that seems pretty useful. Although also like the kind of feature we'd add afterwards, because this might, end up being another thing that needs rounds of bug testing and re-explaining stuff to people. But it does seem useful.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I wrote this program just like in a couple of days. So yeah, there are lots of things that I'm sure would be kind of like gotchas that like, oh yeah, I didn't think of this massive complication. But I mean, getting it working at least to this point, where you can log in and do all this stuff, and it's not too bad. So that was kind of fun to make. And then just, I think for me, was good proof that we can simplify a lot of the collector. Even if we're doing complicated things, just the way that we write it, putting it into functions when necessary, or a class. It doesn't have to be kind of like the unteachable black box that we sometimes describe code as.
Yeah, which I think a lot of collectors become. Or at least for most people, we just say, like, don't worry about it. That just does.
I mean, I know that we try and make it nice so that they can look at the trial types, and then if there's a professional programmer that wants to help us, then they can help with the main stuff. But I think it's more realistic to think that we're getting sort of people, like in their lab, they might just sort of work on MATLAB or ePrime for a while, and they get kind of good at it, and they can make some contribution to sharing with other labs. If collector was simple even at the basic level, where even sort of amateur programmers could take a look at it and understand something about it, I mean, that would be a good thing, because even just, as far as it being open source and open science, if it's too complicated for them to understand, then they're just sort of trusting that, oh yeah, probably their shuffles are shuffling correctly, or probably they're recording reaction time correctly. But if they can actually read it, they can convince themselves, or they could spot bugs that we hadn't thought of. So I think there are good reasons to simplify code where we can.
I mean, I think there's good reasons, but I could also imagine why doing things as objects could make that easier to do than harder. Like, so in the example
I'm not saying no objects. I didn't write objects because I don't know how to use objects, but I think objects are a good way to simplify things. So I was actually talking with Adam about we could turn all of our shuffle functions into an object, and then sort of like we have the shuffle functions.php. But then whenever we wanted to shuffle something, it would just be something like
construct new shuffler.
Well, I guess, Adam, you could do it as a abstract class, which should make it a little easier.
I don't think I said that.
Oh,
were
we talking about setting the shuffles class like abstract?
I was saying that it seems like the functions as they are now would make more sense as a static collection.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Like so I don't know the words for objects at all, but yeah, it would be nice if it was just like.
When you use those double colons, you're talking about static functions.
Okay, yeah, that's what I meant. So yeah, I'm not arguing against objects at all. I'm just saying.
Yeah, so that seems to me like a good case of like encapsulating all these shuffles into one object, then allowing us to use it like static functions, or if we want to just run all the shuffles. Like, you want to, the way we're doing it now, where it's like, okay, it runs mine, then it runs Tyson's. That could just be like shuffle CSV, shuffle. But then we could also have methods of like, multi-level shuffle, Tyson shuffle. And if someone wants to add a new shuffle, they could just add a new method there. And then the construct can know how to, or not the construct, but like the base sort of shuffle would know to run them in sequence. That'd be easy enough to add on without really knowing anything largely about how the program works, besides like, here's what the get from file will give you, and then you're shuffling that thing.
Yeah. Has anyone here like actually tried to teach the collector to someone?
I mean, I usually never try to teach the code. Like, whenever I'm teaching people, it's like, here's where you're going, here's what you're clicking on, here's how you're editing things.
Yeah.
But I rarely start from the beginning. I know I did it one day with the RAs. We just, like, I think Derek was asking. So we just started from, okay, let's go to welcome, or go to index, and how the hell do we get from one page to another? So I was kind of walking them through, like, here's why we're doing this, here's why we're doing that. That's also where I noticed we were clearing session out a lot. I mean, I think it made sense up to the point, like, where I got to, which was to initiate collector, I think. Which I was just explaining to them, like, okay, we do this on every page because it has stuff we need. And I had to kind of go into the Pathfinder, not really how it worked, but like what it does for us and why we use it.
Yeah, I actually, just to make the program as simple as possible, I just hard-coded all the paths, which I know is like a feature that we wanted, but then, I mean, how often really are we changing path names? But yeah, I don't have any fancy features like that, or no Pathfinder in this one. The way that I wrote it was just designed to be, if I had to teach this to someone, what would be like the easiest thing to teach, like so that I could be done with it as fast as possible. So I mean, I was taking things like to the extreme, like to unhelpful amounts of simplifying the code, but
I mean, it does show me that there's lots of stuff we can probably get rid of. I mean, part of it is I think like a few of us need to sit down one day and just like start from the beginning and walk through and decide like what actually needs to be in here. Because a lot of the code just hasn't been looked at in a while. Or at least it hasn't been looked at in sort of the broader scope of the project. Like, we just open it up, find the piece we want to mess with, insert more lines, and then commit. But I'm sure if we go back, we can see cases where it's like, oh, all this error checking no longer needs to happen because of the validators. Or like, all of these things we were worried about, we can just handle them on the input end and be done with it. But I think that would just take a few of us sitting down one day and like literally just walking through the collector beginning to end and determining like what are the actual features we have and what features do we want to keep or what features would we want to build and how do we make that easier on ourselves.
Oh, and one just little bonus. I think so. Just to understand how session works, basically, in every installation of Apache or anything that's using PHP, somewhere on your server you get like a temporary folder that's like this that just saves all the sessions, and then these kind of get cleared out by Apache, sort of randomly. It's like there's no real rule. It just sort of has a timer, and then after that timer, there's a chance that it'll get deleted every checkup. But these are basically a PHP serialized. They're not exactly, but they're almost identical. They're basically a PHP serialized without some extra notation that says something like string 6 session array 42 elements. That would be like the serialized version. I don't know why they pull off this thing, but the session is basically serialized. So right now at the end of the experiment, we write the session, or write the JSON to us to a file inside the collector, right?
Oh, the serialized version, right, Adam?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Because
So
we needed to load back
we
on.
serialize the session, but basically PHP is already doing that on every single page load. It's just doing it into like an external folder, so that if they close their browser, that data becomes lost. Like, since it's only attached to this session ID, which is a number we don't track, like we don't have a way of associating it unless we went through, read every single one of these, tried to see if they had data that matched what we were expecting.
Username, and I unserialize everyone to check the usernames.
Yeah, And I mean, on shared hosting, you'd be mixing with a lot of files that just aren't even collector sessions. So, that. So basically, they're lost if someone closes the browser. But if we're just writing it locally, and then we just have some like lookup system where like the session just records their username, and then their username is meant to look up another file, sort of like how I set it up in this simple collector. So I've got. So in data, every time it's writing session, it just writes it in here. But the only thing it's actually saving into session is just the name, and then like the login ID and the session ID.
Mm-hmm.
But then the rest of the data is just serialized in a file that's under their username, so that if I'm in the collector, the simple collector, and then so here Tyson restart, and then I start one of my things. So hello Applebee cucumber, and then I close it, and I go to some collector that will wipe my session out. So if I go to there, this should have wiped my data by now, right?
Yeah, it should have, but login once now, it's for sure
Yeah.
wiped.
Okay, so we've wiped my data at least once. And then if I go back to simple, I put myself Tyson restart, didn't I?
Yeah.
It'd be a bad demo if I... Okay, so now I'm back onto, I just finished Cucumber, and I'm back onto this. So the fact that I'm saving session internally means that I can also restore session whenever I want. And then in this login page, I just have this section that, once I've validated the username, I try and load. I just have this function that checks for old session data, and I just say, okay, try and load their user data. If it's not null, then try and just continue the experiment. So it was actually super easy. Like this took very little work. Like even this function here, this load user data, is basically just an unserialize. Let's see.
I mean, this does seem like a great way to handle session data, and also how to tie, like we could get it back if we tie it to the username instead of just letting Apache handle it.
Yeah. So
No, that's the big issue. Is like we have no idea how to recover from session getting wiped, and it does happen probabilistically. I mean, it's a low probability, but it's enough of a probability that we should deal with it.
Yeah. And then it was kind of funny. I made experiment sort of like a session variable in kind of an interesting way, so that if you write to it and then you exited, right? There's no time for me to write that new experiment to file, right? You would think. But I have this register save function, which the experiment uses the true parameter, and then what it does is it just says, okay, on register shutdown, run this function, which just global experiment writes that to file. So I could be in the middle of experiment, in the middle of a trial type, edit this variable, and then exit, and this would still be able to save the edits I made. So I sort of can convert a variable into like a pseudo session variable, which is then stored under their username rather than their session ID. So that's kind of fun.
I mean, it seems like a good strategy for dealing with sessions.
Yeah, I thought so. I mean, it's an interesting idea. I mean, I don't know if it's too important to implement, because it doesn't happen too often, but with Sharon's experiments, which are huge, she loses a lot of participants who get an error that indicates basically their session got lost. And I don't know why it always happens with hers, but she gets those errors a lot. And I don't really have an answer for her other than, yeah, that's going to happen every time for you.
I mean, like, how often are we talking?
Like, every single MTurk experiment I've done with her, it has happened.
But I mean, like, once, or it happens, like, 10
Oh,
times?
no,
Or,
lots
like,
of
what
times.
probability?
Like, 1 in 5.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a really bad problem. And so what I was doing was I was just basically, it was in an older version of Collector, but I just had at, I think, initiate Collector, it would just serialize session and write it to a file, and then if they ever got that
When
error,
their session doesn't exist, read it back.
sort of, if their session didn't exist, I wouldn't know who they were, so I would send them to a page that says, I'm sorry, I need your mturk worker ID again, and then they would type it in, and then I would restore them. And at the time, I thought it was wasteful because I was like, oh man, I'm JSON encoding the entire session, every single page, but that's actually what session is doing. So, I mean, if session can handle it, then it's not so much of a burden for us to do it. I mean, it's exactly the same, so we're not losing anything by saving session every time, as long as we're not also saving it into session.
So this seems like a thing that's worth doing, but it's a thing I think we can do later, right? Because this won't affect anything else. Like, this should be standalone, just an upgrade to how we deal with session data.
Yeah, this would be just like an invisible removal of a possible bug.
Okay, so we should add this definitely on the list of things to do. But, yeah, not right now, but definitely worth exploring. Especially if it's a simple enough thing where people don't even notice. Just like, oh, whenever, if you've been getting that error, just download the new version of Collector and you're good to go.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it would be nice to essentially stomp out what has been the hardest bug to deal with.
Yeah, just you lose session and then there's no recovering from that, but there's no reason why you lost session. It's super annoying.
I mean, we could make the recovery automatic, right? Couldn't you just post to experiment? Every time it posts, it also does a get of the username?
Yeah, yes, you could.
And
So
that would be
that's
like,
kind of funny.
Lost session,
Actually,
check to get for a username, and then reread that user.
when I wrote the conductor, I didn't want to deal with losing session since I didn't know how to fix it then, so I just made the entire conductor program not use session at all ever. It just submits the username on every form submit.
Although that's easy enough to hack. Like if I have another person's mturk ID, that's pretty insecure. And that I could just change it. Like if I know Anthony's running at the same time as me, and I know, say we're using our email address, I could just modify my get to be Anthony's email and hit enter, and now I'd get his session.
Yeah, although that's true of the collector, like anyone. So, for example, if you knew Anthony did part 1, you could log in as Anthony part 2. So we're not secure. I mean, basically, their account name is just their mturk name or their UCLA email address, and there's no password on it. So yeah, we are not protecting the integrity of their data from being, mimicked by other people. That's not really a concern of ours, just because.
Yeah, right now we're only basically secure because we hope they don't know anyone else's username.
And no one would care to do that. It's like, oh, I'm going to log in the middle of their test and type in bad answers. Like, who's motivated to do that?
Yeah, what kind of malicious bastard would do that?
So, yeah, the other benefit, which would be really helpful for running in lab, not so much for mturk, but if we write session in the, locally to each collector branch, then it would be possible to, do something like, okay, here's my first experiment, and then here's my second experiment, which is, a different URL, and you can just chain up like 6 of these, and then type in their participant number, and then you say, okay, when you're done with one, click log in. You can't do that right now, I think, because index was wiping the session, and it was causing lots of things to break, and then sometimes done wasn't wiping the session, and that data was getting... I don't know, it's weird right now, but I think we should save session internally to the collector folder.
I mean, I think that's a good idea. Because so we could load it back up just in unserialized, right? Or how do you load those files?
Yeah. So you just... I mean, that's what I'm doing here, is I serialize when the thing closes, and when you ask me to load it, I just return the unserialize of file get contents. So, which is exactly what session is doing. So we're not even going slower than normal. We're going at exactly the same speed. Well, I mean, not exactly. We're going to go a little bit slower, but not noticeably. So.
And in exchange for a lot more reliability.
Yeah.
Although, how would this affect things like, okay, so memcache, right? That lets me write session to memory instead of to the disk.
This would be completely incompatible.
So if I tried to turn on memcache, it would it break, or would it just keep using our old strategy?
It wouldn't break. I mean, I'm still using session to track their username. It's just I'm manually writing to a file, so memcache doesn't stop manual file writes.
Okay, so we'd still be, basically, we would break any of those speed benefits, but we'd still get to use it.
Yeah.
Like, we'd essentially be reading the username part faster, but who cares about that?
Yeah.
And we could also make it a toggle, like, hey, if you have memcache on, turn this feature off.
Yeah.
Because that is a thing, like, once we have our own server, it would probably be better to run with memcache turned on. So instead of having to read-write session every time, we just hold all the existing sessions in memory and then time them out after, I don't know, 2 hours.
Yeah.
Or whatever seems like a reasonable window. You know, once a day we clear out all the sessions we generated.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Although if you do that, then it goes back to, like, if they close their browser, that their data is totally gone.
Oh, yeah. So there's no way to specify what the file name would be when it writes a session? You couldn't say, okay,
Well, you
write
can.
wherever you're going to write, but
That's
make
how
it...
I'm doing it at Initiate. Like, I'm saying, okay, the file to write to... well, I guess,
You're setting the directory, though, but you can't give it
Yeah,
the
I'm setting the
file.
directory. I think you can manually set their session ID. Like, you can do something called session name, which I don't know much about, but there's a function. I'm pretty sure, yeah, you can specify the file name. Because when I was looking at the temp directory of Cogfog, not all the files were something like sesh underscore some long string. A lot of them were clearly custom named, so it's possible.
Okay, so that might be a way to approach it.
Yeah.
Okay, but aside from this, okay, so we still need to talk about Adam stuff, which it sounds like Tyson is warmed on.
Yeah,
We
I
haven't
like it.
done Anthony yet. Or have we? No, we haven't, right? Only Adam showed it to us in person, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't remember.
Oh yeah, because you guys had a later meeting.
Right, because Adam had to work on his lab presentation during our meeting last week.
Yeah. So what do I do?
Show us things, Adam.
So I want to know how. Well, on one level, I kind of want to just know your thought process in setting it up. But then also, how would I do something like check the last 10 trials for their lenient accuracy, and then if it's below 6, copy the last 10 and put them right at the current spot?
Okay, hold on a second. Let me turn up my volume. And I'm loading up my editor here. Okay, so you said, what's my thought process? I don't know. I don't have thoughts. But I guess
So
the
I
main
think-
the main point being that I started writing this when I wanted to I was just trying to put it I'd read some things and I wanted to try to make something I knew using those principles, and it turned into I thought it would be useful for everyone, so I kept writing it.
Cool.
And then you said you wanted to check the last 10 trials for their lenient accuracy,
Mm-hmm.
and if the average is under 6,
Well, just their sum, I guess. Because lenient
If their
accuracy is
sum-
like 0 or 1, right?
yeah, if their sum is under 6, then
Then like just copy the last 10.
and do them again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
ideally, post trials included and everything.
Yeah, so let me just create a fake.
Because I read through your experiment class, and after reading through it, it made a lot of sense to me. But just like when you were doing the demo last week,
Yeah,
I think what was
That didn't-
confusing to me the most was like I was thinking that experiment would just be a container for trials, so that if you said experiment get something, it would get not from current trial, it would like be getting a trial. So I think just like the names.
yeah.
kind of
So
I think if we
I
made
know
the
what you
name
mean.
specific, where it was like, for example, add, if it was called, add to trial, or because I know like to add trial, they're called add trial, but then if things are not named like add trial, it means add to current trial. Like is complete means the current trial, or just
yeah. I got you. So
and then like export works on the general level. So I think that's what kind of threw me off, is not knowing what was the target of a method.
all right, yeah, yeah, okay. So first I'll do the thing you said, and then I'll talk to you about why I named things something and how we could change them however you think. Let me just share my screen here.
Yeah, I was about to say this is going to make a lot more sense, especially for Anthony. You just see like what we're talking about with like how things work now.
Mikey, is Adam presenting now, or?
I think he is. I'm going to say present to everyone. Okay, so now he should be fixed.
Okay, so this on the left here is just so that I don't make a typo in terms of what the functions are called, but here we go. So you said you wanted to get the last 10 trials, so that's like, let's just show this. Get last 10, check lenient accuracy. If lenient less than 6, redo last 10. Yeah?
Yeah, so like a simple case of like we're doing a loop, they need to get 6 right to continue.
Okay, so here's how I'd write my trial type. Maybe it's just a regular Q answer. So down here you're just going to have the normal Q or whatever it is, study trial or copy trial, I guess, whatever the hell they're called now.
It's all word pair. Yeah, that's the problem is when I'm explaining to people, I'm always using trial type names that don't exist. They're like, I was looking for the this, and like, oh yeah, it's not called that anymore. Show me the folder. And I'm like, okay, it's word pair. That's the one you want.
So in login, no, in initiate collector, I set it up so that you have 2 global variables, experiment and trial. And I want the highlighting here. Boom, there we go.
Oh, awesome! I didn't know we had trial. Cool.
Yeah, I was just looking at Adam's newest pulls, so he incorporated the trial settings into trials as well.
Yeah. So trial is just experiment, get current.
Nice.
So yeah, I think it's useful. You can just use always this, but it's going to return the same object because objects are passed around instead of copied.
Yeah.
So anyway, because this is get current, trial could either be a post trial, if we're on a post trial, if the current trial is a post trial, or a main trial, if the current trial we're on is a main trial. Does that make sense? So if I want to get the last 10 trials, I'd use experiment to get that, and it's going to give me the last 10 trials, including post trials.
Cool.
And so I guess one thing here is your code is a little. Right, so if I want to get the last 10 trials, that's easy. I go experiment. How did I do this? I put get trials, and then you can pass it an array of offsets or a string like this.
Oh yeah, can I just do like 1 to 10?
Yeah,
like 1
it would
colon,
be
colon 10?
-10 to -1, I guess. Is that 10 or is that 11? Or 9? 9. And then 9, right? So
No, inclusively it should be 10, right?
Yeah, 10 back and then 1 back. Yeah. Okay. So if I have this, I'd be like trials, right?
Oh, just real quick, are you imagining this as like a scoring file of the last trial, or is this just a new trial type?
This could be a new trial type in my mind.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of trial types that don't display things but just do stuff. Like I made new session that's designed to like it has logic in it, but it doesn't actually show anything. It just goes through all its logic steps, then advances once it's done doing what it needed to do.
I
you
agree.
could do that too. The way I was imagining this was just the regular trial type code is down here.
No. I agree with setting this up as a trial type. I was just thinking that right now, if we set up a trial type to do this, if you had like 30 of them in a row, you'd get a lot of page refreshes, which would look ugly. I think I don't know if it's in there right now, but you could start like an output buffer before you include the trial type. And then if it says if it has some like return false, or it does something to indicate that it wants you to do another trial, then you could just clear out the buffer and do the next trial.
Yeah. Sure, yeah. So now I just want to kind of finish this thing while I'm kind of moving slow. So I'm just going to set my score, initialize it at 0, and then I'll go, for each trial. So one thing that you need to know is that for each of these trials, they're all main trials. So when you do a get trials, it returns only the main trials.
Okay.
I don't know if that's
so basically,
intuitive
another
or
way to
not,
think
but-
about this is that a trial is a row on the procedure. So you
Yeah.
can think that they're trial sets, where main is like trial 0, and the post trials are 1 and 2.
Right. Yeah. So when I say get last 10, I'm getting the last 10 rows in the procedure file.
Okay, and I think that's what people would presume is happening. Like we naturally have sort of taught people to treat rows as this is a set of things, but it's one thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
Good.
it would be ambiguous to me, but if I had to guess, I might guess
Yeah.
procedure rows.
I'm pretty clear in the documentation about what it's giving. I think Tyson had a question before about I don't know when this is getting, when it says it's getting the current trial, what that means. So whenever I use where's the Google Hangout deal? Whenever I use trial, I mean it could be a post trial or a main trial. Otherwise, I'll use the words main trial or post trial in the documentation. Anyway, so I'm getting the last 10 main trials. Where did I check? Where did I score my leaning accuracy? I'm gonna guess it was on the main trial part.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna go ahead and go get response. Is that what I called it? I'm pretty sure I did. Yeah, get response, and then I'll just put whatever I saved it as. And I'll just add that to my score. I mean, and then you're just going to check the score. If score less than 6. Now here's a fun one. So we want to duplicate a bunch of trials.
Mm-hmm.
So what I can do is, if I wanted, I could go through a set. Let me just check my deals. I was thinking about making a few things. Now I can't remember which ones I actually wrote the code for. So copy. I think I just did copy. But what I can do is I can do this here. I can go. I have trials already, right? So if the score is less than 6, what I'll do is I'll just do another for each, and I'll go through trials again. Trials as trial. And then I'll actually do this by reference, just for fun. You could do it however you wanted, make a new array or whatever. But I would just say I'm just going to change the trial to trial equals trial copy. Another equivalent thing you could do is trial equals clone. These do the same thing, they're alias. If I do this, then what it does is it creates a copy of the trial, but it removes all the responses and resets the position in the experiment for the trial.
So is clone a PHP keyword, or?
Yeah, it is. I altered what it does for the trial class though.
Okay.
So I just
Okay, so you can override the default clone behavior to say, like, when you're cloning, first do these steps, then clone.
Exactly. So it clears out the responses that were saved, and but everything else is copied. it clears out the responses in post-trial, and it resets the post position and it sets the trial position to null. So that's useful because if you're just cloning it, it doesn't have anything that it goes to really. We just made a copy. We don't know where it goes yet. So
Okay.
what I'm doing here is I'm just replacing everything in trials with a clone of trials. And once I do that, I can just say experiment add trials and just put trials in there.
Why did you have
And-
to make the for each use a reference?
I mean, I didn't have to. I could have just been. I could have done something like.
Oh, wait, hold on. I actually understand now. Never
He's
mind.
explaining
just
how all
made
the responses.
trials to equals array, right? And I could have done it that way.
And so on
I was
line
just thinking, like-
17, I could just say shuffle trials, right? Because trials is just an array of objects. Like,
Oh yeah, if you
so I could say,
wanted to like.
grab the last 10, shuffle them, and then put them as the next 10.
Oh heck yeah, you could do that. Would be cool. You could do. I would put it after I cloned them. It doesn't matter where you do it, honestly. You could before the clone or after. But yeah, just shuffle trials.
Cool.
And add trials
just add
knows
them
how to
back in.
deal with an array of trials.
Yeah, add trials will actually use add trial, which uses add trial absolute. So let me just show you the code for that. I don't know if you can see it very well, but what it does is, oh, what the hell?
Here, wait a second. I think my dog needs to go out. I'll be right back.
All right.
You keep explaining. I'm recording.
Okay. So what it does is it checks to see if we're passing it in a main trial, or sorry, it checks to see if we're passing in an array. If we pass in an array, it tries to create a main trial out of the array. Otherwise, it checks to see if we already have passed it a main trial, and then it tries to copy it. So honestly, now that I'm looking at that code, that kind of makes it so that you can't accidentally just drop in stuff without with extra information added to it. So this part of the code up here where I clone them isn't actually necessary. I can just shuffle them and add them in.
So then, if I was passing in an array, what type of array is it expecting? Is it just like a procedure row?
I think that all it has to have is a trial type.
Okay, cool.
And if you have anything prefixed with post and a number, that also has to have a trial type.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that's the only restrictions on it.
So it will parse out the post trials of either of an array.
Yeah. So I could pass in something like array, and I have to have a trial type, and I tested that. It kind of throws up if you don't have a trial type.
Does it care about case, or does it just lowercase everything?
This part, I don't. It depends, I think, on. I think it checks without the case. It doesn't matter what you put for the case, it checks for both by just lowering everything.
Okay.
So Q and Q are equivalent.
All right.
You have to have a trial type. You can put post trial type, post one, trial type. If you put post one without a trial type, and you just put in like a Q or something like that, it won't let you do anything. It'll be like, nope, sorry, can't do it.
Will it fail to add the whole row? Will it generate an error message? What will it do?
It'll stop everything. Yeah, it'll fail. Everything will fail. It throws an error at some point.
And so if I was passing in a main trial instead,
yeah.
that main trial includes its post trials?
If I pass in, so for instance, if these trials up here had post trials in them, when I'm cloning them, I'm keeping the main trial or the post trials with them.
Okay. So main trial isn't just main trial, it's the container for its trial and any post trials.
So
Right,
the thing I'm looping through is like a 3-step procedure. It's like, okay, they do one thing, they make a judgment, and then they get some feedback, and that's sort of each trial. I want to get the last 10. This will maintain like, okay, I've grabbed those 10, I checked their score, I shuffle them, I put them ahead, and now each of those pieces will still contain their post trial. So I'll still see the thing, make a judgment, get feedback.
Yeah.
Okay, so it very much keeps the structure of how my experiment works, and it kind of works the way you'd imagine like Lego blocks should work. Like pick these up, copy them ahead.
Yeah. I haven't added a way to remove like things like say I want this, but I don't want the post trial part anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't added anything like that. I'm not sure.
But I mean, it would
you
be
can
as
do it,
simple as a
though.
method that's like remove post, right? And then it's like, okay, clone that one,
Yeah.
and then on this trial, remove post.
Yeah, yeah. Or you could just do something like, no, yeah, you can't do it right now, I don't think, and that might be something that I need to change.
But it wouldn't be hard, like it wouldn't be impossible
No,
to. Like with
it'll
the
take
structure,
like
it
2
sounds
seconds. Yeah,
totally possible.
yeah. All you do is create a method in the trials
Mhm.
that just unsets that deal and renumbers them. Yeah. So I mentioned while you were gone, add trials actually does the cloning for you.
Oh,
So
nice.
all you really have to do is check to see if your score is less than 6, shuffle them if you want, and then add them back in. And we'll add them at the next position. If I wanted to add them 10 spots down the road, there you go.
Oh, that's cool. Or like 3 spots. Like say there's some instruction loop that
Yeah.
happens. Like, okay, you're gonna get these instructions, then you're gonna start again.
Exactly. Or you could even add your instructions pretty easily by going experiment, add trial, and then so just because instructions are easy, right? You can just go array trial type equals or is instruct, and you pass in your text is some instructions that you've got figured out. There you go. You've just added it in at the next spot, and you might want to be like, all right, I want to add in post trial or these other trials right after it at 2.
Oh, so this would be actually really nice. Like in my scoring, I could say, if your score is this much, I'm gonna add a little note that says, hey, pay close attention to whatever. Like, if you chose option B, then you're gonna get this feedback. If you chose option A, you're gonna get this feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And simple enough as just doing these sort of add instructor. I can
And by
get it as
by
like,
adding a trial like this, it also is making it so that your output clearly reflects what happened.
no.
You know what I mean? Because you could do that with scoring. You could just have the feedback show something if they got one thing or show another thing if they got another thing. Here it's like, okay, I'm creating a trial type, and when I put these instructions in, it's going to update text to be whatever those instructions are. So like I'll know in my output exactly what they got for feedback on every trial.
Yeah, that's pretty nice.
So how would I check a post-trial lenient accuracy?
Yeah, okay, so I was thinking about that too. So what I'd say is that if you know that lenient accuracy is in post, instead, right? So maybe we did all this. So I'll set my score again or whatever. For each trial, this trial, and instead I'll just go trial get post trial, and then get response.
And if there's 2 post trials, like post 1 and post 2, will you specify? Okay.
Yeah, there you go. So right now, I think I want to change the names of some of the So here's my little conundrum. Maybe you guys can lend some input here. For all the things that do things relatively, it just says add trial or add trials.
Mm-hmm.
If I wanted to make this so that I add this at position 2 in the experiment, I would just add absolute. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's the correct way to
Yeah,
go.
I think defaulting to like, okay, we're just gonna put this right ahead of where you're at.
Yeah.
Is usually what
So-
people want to do when they add trials. Like they don't want to be like go out to trial 100. They want to be like in 3 trials I want X to happen. Like I wanted them to see this instruct after the next 3 trials.
So where that kind of messes up a little bit, not messes up, but say, so I made get post trial to do, it includes the main trial as post trial 0.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of makes sense when you think about it. But if you say something like trial get post trial, here if I ran through 2 post trials and I do get post trial, it's giving you the current post trial. So this will be post trial 2. If instead I did something like trial equals clone trial, now it's actually giving me the main trial. But if I put in absolute and I put in get in post trial absolute 1, now I'm getting the first post trial and the second post trial. So weirdly, the absolute I think makes like leaving that like this seems like if I did this get post trial 2, it makes me think that I'm getting the second post trial.
Yeah, that does.
So
Wait, what are we getting there if not the second post trial?
If right here, so if I cloned it and I had 3 post trials, and I said trial get post trial 2, I'm actually getting. So if I clone it, I'm actually getting post trial 2, right? Because it's 0 is the main trial, 1 is post trial 1. Or sorry, no, that's not right. So I'm getting the post trial 2 post trials down the road. So 0, 1, 2. I'm getting number 2. But if I didn't clone it and I was at 3 and I did get post trial 2, I think it fails out and says this is. So what will happen is this will return null because there is no post trial 5, and then it'll be like can't get response from object null.
Oh.
So
I think
Post trial to me doesn't seem like it should be. It should be like a default to absolute, right, Tyson? Like relative.
I can understand in this situation how it's confusing, but then I can also imagine that if you made a trial type, say MCPick interacted with the next one, so it was like, okay, get my post trial and change it in some way. Whether that was like if you started with MCPick and then your post 1 was a JOL, or you started with a priming trial type and then post trial 1 was MCPick and post trial 2 was JOL, you'd want that code to not use the absolute. Like you'd want it to use the next post trial. So in this situation, yeah, it's confusing. I think I agree that it's a little misleading, but I think in the general case, getting the relative post trial is probably still what people are going to want to do.
Yeah, I mean it also is consistent. So whenever it doesn't say something like absolute, you should assume that it's relative.
Yeah, I think it just takes some getting used to. But I mean, once I sort of enforce that on myself, it will make more sense. And like remember that I'm always getting absolute, and I'm always getting relative unless I've written absolute into my method call. Like if I don't see the word absolute there, I'm calling something relative to my current position.
For sure, that's correct.
You could also name that function get next post trial, just to make it.
Yeah.
Like we don't have to keep names short where like we have either get or get trial, or you can make all the names a little bit longer, and like you could call them get relative and get absolute. You don't have to shortcut one.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I just don't like it when the method call takes up the entire
I agree with that.
Characters.
But in the case where we want people to be able to look at a trial type for the first time and get a general understanding, the sacrifice is probably worth it.
Yeah, so that's how I do this thing.
No, it looks good. It looks pretty much like what we would have all hoped from an experiment class, so that looks good.
Yeah, I think some of this is just knowing what methods are available and how they work. Like, I think this is really helpful, seeing like how you would solve this problem.
Yeah.
And then can you explain the difference between the trial, the main trial, and the post-trial classes?
Yeah. So just in general, the structure of an experiment. So experiments hold trials.
Right.
And trial is an abstract class. An abstract class is a class that you cannot instantiate on its own. It has to be extended into something. So the two things that trial extends into currently are main trials and post trials. Maybe it would make sense even to have something like Mikey was talking about, a control trial where it doesn't actually show anything or need to do a lot of that stuff. It just needs to execute some logic. I don't know. But for now, we just have main trials and post trials. And a main trial holds post trials inside of it. So that's the general structure there. When you advance through the experiment, it will ask main trial. Whenever you do anything in experiment, usually it's asking the main trial to do something. And what I mean by that is if I say experiment, for instance, just update some value, update text to be, say we'll update min time. It's min time as user, and I want the default to be 4. So I'll say experiment update min time to 4, and what it will do is it will ask. So what happens there is it asks experiment. It goes experiment. If I say update min time, blah blah blah. So what actually happens is inside experiment it goes this get current, and what this does is it get current goes okay, this main trial, this trial, I don't remember how I labeled it, and it asks that trial to get whatever its current position is. So the trial knows where it is, and it'll be like, okay, well, I'll give you the current post position I'm at. If I'm at 0, then I'll give you myself. If I'm at 1, I'll give you the current that post trial 1. Okay, once it has current, then it runs update on that object with whatever. So experiment's always just asking main trial, hey, where are you? What are you doing? Can you do this for me? And then main trial goes, all right, well, where am I? If I need to ask a post trial to do something, I'll do it. Otherwise, I'll do it to myself. That's like the main kind of structure of everything right now. There are a lot of other things that go in, like the response object has some funny things added to it that may or may not need to be there, but at least it works right now, so I don't need to change it yet. You have validators being added to things. Trial settings is added to trials right now. Well, in my branch, it doesn't have to be, but I think it made sense.
Yeah, it actually looks pretty nice. So I'm looking at the display file for the attention check.
Yeah.
And it seems pretty straightforward. Like the approach you're using here looks like it would make sense.
I think it looks like this, trial settings, and then whatever you had there, just like you get it, right?
Yeah,
Something
so
like,
let me show you.
Trial settings.
Yeah, so that's how we're reading settings out now. So it's like, okay, the question is trial settings question. Correct is trial settings correct. And this is using the class that Tyson wrote, right? The settings class. It sort of knows how to parse these things.
What are we looking at?
This is the display file for attention check.
Oh, here, it's on your screen. I found it. Okay.
Yeah. Oh wait, which screen am I sharing? Okay, yeah, I'm sharing.
Yeah, you're presenting.
Okay. Yeah, so so this is the same thing that Tyson wrote.
Yeah.
That settings class. Okay.
Is it? Is it just
So
straight?
I like this, and that I
Move
like
down?
the ability. Wait, move down here. So this makes a lot of sense to me. Like, this is kind of the way I would expect to do things.
Most of this is just Tyson's old code, right?
Yeah, and this, so I think what's nice about having the common settings is that we can list these out in the header, just like, okay, this is the setting, these are the values it takes. Like, there's a question, there's correct, and we can just give it sort of examples of what goes there. These are
Yeah.
alternatives, that's how those would be formatted. And I
So
think once we
these are-
explain to people, like, settings work like this, and then we can just say, okay, well, these are the settings you have available. And that's
These are
it.
all the things that came from settings column. I don't even know how I did that now. I must have just taken that array from experiment and shoved it into your deal when I was creating it. I don't remember where though.
Yeah, I'm not
It
sure
worked,
either.
though.
I went to your newest branch and I looked and I was like, okay, that looks sort of what I'd expect.
I haven't tried anything with an attention check though.
But I mean,
'Cause
we
I
can
don't
mess with
think
those
so.
other ones to see if they.
I think the other ones, I think I checked like font size or something like that. One of the ones that did have settings. I don't remember which ones do. No, font size has a validator. I always check that one. I don't remember which ones have settings.
Oh, I like this default here on audio. If the get is empty, then update it with listen carefully.
Yeah, we changed that a long time ago. But oh, that was one thing I wanted to point out though. So notice that this is just how I'm kind of thinking about things. If I could have gone at the top, I could have gone experiment get text, or text equals get experiment get text, right?
Yeah.
And then I could have said if it's empty, whatever. If it's not, then change it to listen carefully. If I do that, then I don't really know what I've shown people.
Yeah, like in your output, you
Like-
would see the value of text.
Right, instead of listen carefully. So by doing this and updating it, now I know that my output will always follow this. So I went through and changed all of the deals to do this. But like there's a couple spots where you can see like Q equals experiment get Q.
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
Right in the same page. Like I'm not changing it, so I just left it in like that for readability. I don't think you can do function calls. I don't know if you can inside the curly braces down there, but it could just be put in there. Whenever I do multiple gets of the same item, then I usually left it as like getting the deal first, making the copy, and then doing it. But I think I went through and changed everything else to match these things. And I think that on this trial in particular, everything here that has experiment could actually just be trial, because they're all getting it from the current trial.
Yeah.
But using experiment is safe, but it doesn't. I think it's equivalent. It might even be like a nanosecond faster if you do it as trial.
Mikey, can you test that code? Because I remember I was getting some bugs when I was trying to use empty on
Yeah.
a getter, because empty works on a variable, not on like a value.
Where's my logo?
But it will return.
I still have this.
Get will return the value or null if it can't
Well-
be found.
Right, yeah. But both of those should evaluate to empty. I
What
thought.
should?
Let me get my thing to start up again here.
Like,
What do you
well,
mean?
let me just test it on mine.
I thought I was able to fix that error with it sort of losing me, but I have not. I know exactly what it is too, I just don't know how to fix it. So the problem is that here what it's doing is an initiate collector, so if I show you just index, where'd it go? Okay, so index runs and then initiate collector is doing this. So I check on line 37, if this thing is already set and it's an object, then just read it again and update its values. But the problem is that if you've been on another branch, so because I'm using GitHub, what I'm doing is just switching branches on the same folder. So I was in dev, I had a session there, and it had a value of session settings. I switched branches, and when I tried to load it, session settings was set, and it was returning itself as an object. But I guess the way we're auto-loading it it just doesn't end up working out. And these checks pass,
you have to
and
have
it says, I don't know
the
how to do this.
yeah. So I know what it, so it's that if you're trying to load something from like a serialize or whatever,
Mhm.
And the class has not already been defined, then it doesn't know what to load. I don't know exactly all the reasons behind it, but then it returns like a half object or something like that, and you can't. It's not the right deal.
Yeah,
that
it
you
just says it's an incomplete object. Essentially, if you do a var dump and initiate collector at
Mhm.
We var dump right here of session.
Yeah.
It'll see it's there, and it'll say it has the values, I guess the strings we stored into it, but it's not a real object.
Yeah.
And it says incomplete object, and I haven't found a good way to check if an object is complete.
Yeah, I always just had to wipe it whenever I did that.
Actually, couldn't we check if it has a method? Right? Couldn't you say if this thing has a certain method? And that check would always fail if it's an incomplete object, and then we'd not do this until we had a real object.
Sure. Well, instead of is object,
It just has
what
method.
should settings be?
What do you mean, what should it be?
If you go back to settings,
Okay,
like
so
on your deal, what it says is object. What object should settings be?
it should be a collector settings object.
So if you put, instead of is object, you put get class equals collector / settings. It's underscore class. Yeah, there you go. And you put the session settings inside the class deal. Yeah.
Oops, I hit the wrong button. Okay, so get that class, and then that class is equal to something.
Yeah, put it equal to collector settings.
Just as a string.
Yep. There you go. Now it'll only do it if the class is collector settings, not PHP incomplete class.
Okay, let's see if this solves my issue, because yeah, I've been running into this a lot. Nope. Alright, did I save this? Okay, I saved. Still doing it. Why the hell is it doing that?
Is it the same error?
Get class.
Well, you
Class
have to
Environment of the object you're trying to operate was loaded before unserialized.
go up. So your session right now
Mm-hmm.
is still holding the incomplete object from before, right?
Yeah.
So when you do session start, isn't that where the error happens?
Now the error is happening when it's trying to run line 67 now. Or is that actually? Well, it's giving me an error down here. That doesn't make any sense.
So that's because.
Oh, you can show that the class definition experiment of the object you're trying to operate was loaded before.
Okay.
Oh, so yeah.
So now it's just another one. So if you go down, yeah, it's the same error now at the bottom, just with experiment.
So check that is.
Well, it would be collector. Oh yeah, I see what you're doing. Yeah.
And was it collector / experiment?
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see if that does it. Oh, nice. Fixed. Okay, I'm gonna push this to your branch.
Cool.
GitHub collaborative development.
Tyson, did you figure out?
Bug.
I don't know enough about objects. How do you do the magic method for gets?
Oh, I don't use them in mine, but it's _get.
Is it _get?
Yeah. The magic ones are always double underscores.
What am I doing wrong with this then? Shouldn't I have replaced my getter?
Okay, let's see. Get.
Oh,
key.
wait, hold on. Then it would have been something else. Yeah, I understand. All right, never mind. So here.
You wouldn't do get.
If we look
there.
at this. Yeah. So if we look at this.
Okay, where's
Well,
Tyson?
actually, let's look at my code for a bit.
Okay, I push you to everybody.
Okay, so I just have an object that has a property, and when you ask for it, it will return it, and then if you ask for something it doesn't have, it'll return null.
Yeah.
And then I'm just var dumping that, and I'm also var dumping the result of empty. So we
Okay.
see that we're getting back a float, but the empty value is false.
Why?
So the reason is because empty isn't. So if you just do this, I mean it's kind of funny, but if you do var dump empty of true, you're going to get false. Because empty isn't evaluating the value, it's evaluating the variable. So if I instead do test is equal to my prop, or then if I did test, this is now going to be true.
But put in but you know what? You don't even need to do that. Go back to it.
Okay.
Go so empty my test get prop, but put put another set of parentheses around it, will that work?
Let's see. No, yeah, it's
Yes.
still false. I think that would the only thing that would change is that if it was checking the variable, it would go to checking the value. But if you're checking a value, empty will always say false because empty isn't checking if it evaluates it true. It's does the variable equal true. So if you don't pass it a variable, you always get false.
That is fucking stupid.
Yeah. So what you have to do is you would do something like my
I'll put it
prop
equal to null
is
instead.
Yeah, you could do that. But you could also just do that, and then if you do var dump
Yeah.
prop, this will evaluate, because now you've actually saved it into, so that now, if
Yeah.
we do this,
Yeah.
did it not? Yeah, so, oh wait, no,
You
it's
did.
empty.
Yeah, you got it.
There we go. That's what I wanted to do. And so it'll evaluate true, well, still false.
Well,
Alright.
still false. Well, is my prop false? Oh no, it
check.
can't be false. It's impossible for it to be false. You're setting it as my time.
Yeah, it's a thing now.
Oh, I know why that's happening. It's because var dump is evaluating the value of empty. Isn't it? And doesn't? Oh no,
I
empty
mean-
returns true or false. I get it. Never mind. My fault. Yeah, that's strange.
Yeah, so
I don't
empty
know.
is weird. Empty is not the most reliable one when dealing with objects that are
That can't be
returning
true. Hold on.
properties.
Hold on. Put in empty. All right. So delete my props. Screw my prop. Just I'm in your var dump.
Oh.
Okay. So just put empty, and put like a character string, and then put right after it an empty string.
Like that?
Empty string.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. You should get true, false.
False true. Well, yeah,
Why?
so that's not empty, which is correct. And that is empty.
Yeah. There you go. See? It evaluates the value.
Hmm.
I don't know why it's not
Then maybe
evaluating.
sometimes it
anything.
was returning null or, well,
That's strange, right?
yeah, sometimes it's confusing.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
very strange.
So I would just, for those error checking things, I would just say whatever we're returning, just like equal false that, or check if it's an empty string.
So in my tests, the tests
on.
I run, I use
Maybe I was just
the-
doing that for the whole time. Like, what if we go back to my prop is equal to B?
my test get my prop.
So this should be. It should say that this is false, right?
Right.
It does, and then
If you just var dump it, what do you get?
This would be great. Bet you're gonna get different answers here.
oh
Wait, what the hell?
So it's not empty. So that's why it's false.
Yeah.
It's not empty.
yeah.
Suck on that.
But what if it is empty? So like call for a property you don't have.
Bad.
Yeah.
Bad.
I guess it's working.
Okay. All right.
Oh,
You
what
almost
the hell?
like ruined my world. I was like, there's so many lines in Collector that have empty in them that I wrote. It's like, don't do this to me, Tyson.
Okay, the world is not empty. We're all good now.
Okay, that makes sense.
All right, I gotta go. I gotta take my girlfriend to work, and I have to finish making this lecture for the MCAT guys.
I also have to go. But this sounds like, I mean, are we pretty close to just saying they should be dev now? I feel
Dude,
like.
I'm ready to merge them. There was that one thing we just said though. There's a couple things. So, though they are, I need to include this way to remove post trials.
Mhm.
And also maybe delete a trial from, maybe just like ability to delete a trial from the experiment. Though I'm more inclined to skip something for that. But anyway, deleting trials and then multiple choice pick. I don't think it works. I'm not sure. I can't remember. I haven't tried to use it. And I need to finish doing the deal with validators where I only get one and don't merge them together. Though I might have already done that. I think I already did, but I'm not sure.
Okay, and then next week on Wednesday we'll be having. I mean, we should get this merged by then, and then we can have the RAs testing everything, and they can be like, this works, this doesn't work.
Yeah.
These settings don't toggle correctly. Whatever it is they're checking.
I mean, I'll merge. I can do the validators thing tonight, and the remove and the deleting tonight, and then. I mean, other than that, it's ready to go. I've got everything else merged in. I gotta sync that merge that you just sent, unless you pushed it to experiment class.
I pushed it to experiment class.
All right. So, other than
it
that,
looks like Dev hasn't had any activity since you branched from it, or since you've merged in. There's been nothing on Dev.
Right. And I made sure to rebase the commits from settings so that it keeps your names on there.
Yeah, we did it. No, it's Tyson.
Huh?
What does rebasing mean?
So if you just merge, it takes all the work and it basically says, okay, all this work is going in as if it was one commit right now that I'm making. Like I made all those changes for like settings.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But instead, what you can do is you can change to the branch that you want to include, and then what you say is, I want to replay everything I did in this branch, but I want to start from a different spot. So what I did is I went back to the trial settings branch, and I said, I want to rebase this on experiment class, which is basically saying, instead of starting where I did on dev, pretend that my starting point was the beginning of was the end of experiments class, and then it starts trying to add the changes one by one, and you have to go through a bunch of merge conflicts usually, but eventually it keeps everything attributed to the person that created it. So that's nice. I just didn't want to like add in like 30 commits and be like, hey, look what I did.
Look how awesome I am. Let's get all this work.
What a coincidence that you wrote a settings class.
The guy in the $6,000 suit.
Come on.
All right. I gotta go take my girlfriend over. I'll see you guys later.
All right, see you guys.
Yeah.
That's it.
See you, Anthony.
That's it.